We're going to get started. I know it's commonplace for a lot of activist groups to get started a few minutes later, but, oh, thank you. But because we have such a tight agenda and so much to cover, we're going to start pretty much right on time. Because of that, feel free to get up and get something to eat, go to the bathroom, get a drink, whatever you might need. But so my name is Renzi. And I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion, which is one of the sponsors of these events, and I will be the facilitator for tonight. I have the agenda on this little handy-dandy device of mine, which is why I'm holding it. So if you're new, a few basic housekeeping things. The bathrooms are straight out. I believe the men's are right down this hall, and women and and all gender bathrooms are right around the corner. There are also drinking fountains out along that hall as well. So our friend Dean here is video recording everybody so that people who can't be here can watch us online, and also so we have historic records of everything we talk about here. And so if there's anybody in the room who would prefer not to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand so we can avoid you. All good? Good, okay. So for discussion tonight, we use a system called the stack system. And that's one of the big reasons we have everyone have one of these manila cards, because not everybody knows everyone's name. We're a big group. And the way that stack works is that you raise your hand, and our stack taker for the evening is Emily back here in the red glasses and blue shirt. She'll see you raise your hand, write your name down in the order in which she sees you raise your hand. And in this group, I believe we do what's called progressive stack, which means that if somebody raises their hand for the first time alongside somebody who's raised their hand multiple times, priority will be given to the person who hasn't spoken yet, just to give everyone a chance to have their voice heard. Let's see, what else? Yeah, like I said, I have the agenda up here. And for anybody who may not know, the reason we do the pronoun thing is to be in solidarity with people who are transgender or non-binary, or who are in any sort of like gender transition. So that's why we do that, and it's just something we do out of solidarity with the LGBTQ community. Okay, so I'm asked to give a basic explanation of what the Green New Deal discussion series is. And what this is a coming together of people who care about climate justice, who advocate for a variety, a diverse spectrum of different tactical choices. We have everyone here from electoral campaigners to the diehard civil disobedience folks. And the idea is that we come together to decide what we want climate justice, or what we think climate justice should look like in Allegheny County or in the southwestern PA region, and work together to make the Green New Deal happen in our region. So a quick overview of the agenda for tonight. First, we'll have a land acknowledgement and a redlining acknowledgement, an overview of the essay we were all asked to read tonight, which is Naomi Klein's Capitalism versus the Climate, which starts on page 70 in the book. A presentation by Dr. Patricia DeMarco, some discussion of the essay and Dr. DeMarco's presentation, a little break, another presentation by union organizers Al Hart and Ben Wilson of United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America. A little more discussion. After that, there'll be some outreach invitations, and then announcements of upcoming actions and events related to Green New Deal topic. Even though it's a lot to sit for 2 hours and do all this, however, if you feel moved or inspired to help us get a Green New Deal really moving in our region, we invite everyone to join these optional working groups from 7 to 8 p.m. And we have political action, outreach and education, logistics, and Green New Deal proposal drafting. So there's something for everyone, regardless of what your heart calls you to do. Oh, okay, so
One thing
yes.
to that. So we're really lucky tonight. Patty DeMarco actually offered to lead a visioning session during that 7 to 8 period. So this is something that she's done with cities, municipalities, all kinds of organizations. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask the working groups, logistics, outreach and education, and political action, to go into the Pirates Room upstairs. And then Patty will lead a visioning session, which will also be recorded. And did you already ask about recording?
Okay, so after all of that fun housekeeping stuff, the first thing on the agenda is our land acknowledgement and redlining acknowledgement. And Brianne, are you doing that? Carol.
The land acknowledgement?
Am I doing it?
Oh, yes. Do you have it?
I do, but
Okay. I think that email must have gotten lost.
yeah, I didn't see that. I sent it out to the planning team, but okay, so let's all just take a breath. Bring ourselves into this space. This is an honoring of the original peoples of this land, and we wish to acknowledge the original custodians of the land that we now call the United States of America. Here in Pennsylvania, that would be the Erie, the Iroquois, the Seneca, the Oneida, the Lenape, the Munsee, the Shawnee, and the Susquehannock, to name just a few. We acknowledge that they occupied and cared for this land over countless generations, and we wish to pay tribute to them, their elders, and for their continuing culture of respect for the land and air and water, and for their care for all living creatures as we enjoy this bountiful earth today. Their history humbles us, and together may we work for justice, truth, and reconciliation.
Thank you so much. And did we have someone to do the redlining acknowledgement as well? Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I don't want to take credit for this, by the way. My boyfriend Sean wrote it, so he'll be here later. But so in addition to the land acknowledgement, it's also important for us to acknowledge the damage that the practice of redlining has done to our community. According to data pulled from the 2010 census, out of the top 50 metropolitan areas with the largest black populations, Pittsburgh is the 19th most segregated city in America. This reality reflects at least a century of discrimination by banks as well as state and federal government. Most notably, during the Great Depression, the Homeowners Loan Corporation, created under FDR's New Deal, carved up cities into color-coded maps to determine which areas were most worthy of receiving financing for housing. On these maps, the red districts represented areas with black or racially integrated populations, which they deemed to be high-risk or hazardous investments. The whiter an area was, and the further removed it was from these redline districts, the more likely it was to be bolstered by government financial support. You can find these maps online. In Pittsburgh, many of the redline districts clustered along the river edges, most likely because these areas were near the mills and the pollution from the mills. Sorry, I keep losing my place. Also, these areas were most prone to flooding. Housing discrimination continued in many forms for many decades, at least as recently as the 2008 housing crisis, and has caused generations of black families to be excluded from owning homes and gaining equity. So as we further our discussion today of the Green New Deal, let's keep in mind our long history of racial inequality and which communities have been neglected or negatively impacted by these histories and public policies, and how our race informs our relationships to our environment. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Emily. All right, the next item on the agenda is an overview of Naomi Klein's essay, Capitalism versus the Climate, which was the optional reading we had for this meeting. Who is, oh, Brianna is, okay.
Yeah, you're welcome to go up there.
Hopefully that stays. All right. So, capitalism versus climate. How many folks were able to read this chapter? Awesome. Great. So I feel like maybe it was me, but maybe you all felt this too. This piece was written in 2011, but it really felt like it was written last week. And it's really all in the title of this chapter, Capitalism versus Climate. If we really want to take seriously addressing the climate crisis, we have to realize that real solutions aren't going to be found within the current system of capitalism that we live within. And I apologize, but I'm going to start off by reading a pretty lengthy quote. This is how she starts off the chapter, but I feel like it was just something really grounding for me. And so Naomi Klein writes, "There is simply no way to square a belief system that vilifies collective action and venerates total market freedom with a problem that demands collective action on an unprecedented scale and a dramatic reining in of the market forces that created and are deepening the crisis." So once again, just reiterating the fact that you cannot address the climate crisis within the system that is creating it. And then she opens the chapter talking about how she attends this forum, not really a forum, but some sort of event, the Heartland Institute's 6th International Conference on Climate Change, which is a space where climate deniers and right-wing talking points, or right-wing folks come in, share talking points about how, the climate science is wrong, we don't need to really take action on climate change. But she, in discussing some of their words, she highlights something that their conversations revealed to her, which is something that is really essential for the left and for any other groups who think that they want to address the climate crisis. And it is the fact that transformation of our economic and social systems, i.e. capitalism, is essential and critical and is the only way that we can really address the climate crisis. And it was really funny to me reading the opening parts of that chapter because when folks were just like really afraid of what addressing the climate crisis would look like and how it would have to put some fetters on free market capitalism that has just been operating without any limits for the past 40 years. And so in their own fears, we're able to see what it's going to take to address the crisis. Then she really lays out 6 points for a climate agenda, which she says would be useful in addressing the climate crisis. And so I'm just going to run through those 6 points really briefly. First, she says that we need to really look at the public sphere and public investment in infrastructure. And by really emphasizing the public in this point, it takes away the profit motive that the capitalist industries would have in terms of bringing in new green infrastructure, new green energy systems. And then also, she said when we rely on the public that it also we need to transform our understanding of what is realistic. Today we have a really limited sense of what is possible, and in order to address the climate crisis, we have to expand our realm of possibility. She emphasizes, this is number 2, planning is critical and something that we've been really alienating recently or in the past 40 years. And so we have to take seriously creating serious plans that see our world in the long term, and especially focus on planning around industrial use, land use, thinking about just transition for workers who will be displaced as we move from fossil fuel industry to more green technologies, and also thinking about agricultural planning as well. And then in this point, she also acknowledges the fact that we need planning that really centers collective priorities and not corporate profits. She also, in her agenda, this is number 3, lays out that we need to focus on corporate regulation. And it's essential. She talks about just stopping the subsidies that go to the fossil fuel industry. She speaks a little bit more a little later. this is the fastest 5 minutes of my life. She also mentions that you need to, number 4, relocalizing production. And so this is an emphasis on reining in free trade, global free trade, and thinking about how when we opened up global free trade, the just amount of emissions that comes with having to transport products across the globe. And so it's in recognizing that if we relocalize production, that is going to be the one thing that puts a major check on corporate power, and that is not going to be easy to achieve, but it is necessary, once again, if we want to address the climate crisis. She talks about reining in consumption, especially in some of the wealthiest nations in the world that consume way too much compared to others who have nothing to consume. And also she mentions this decoupling myth, which is the idea that we can both pursue green innovation and also keep growing at the same pace that we are. That's completely incompatible with one another. We cannot keep growing and also be efficient at the same time. So no. And something that was really clarifying for me in that section as well was just she mentions how there are certain aspects that of our economy that are going to have to expand and seize more control, and that includes the public sector, cooperative businesses, local business, and nonprofits. And then also seeing the expansion of industries that have like low impact on ecology, including care, labor, teaching, you name it. And then the 6th point of an agenda that's really going to take the climate crisis seriously is making sure that you tax the rich. And she outlines a lot of different policies, from carbon taxes, putting a tax on financial speculation, increasing corporate and taxes on the wealthy, cutting the military budget. And then in order to do this, you have to make sure that there is coordination globally. This is not going to be successful if you only have one country that is like pursuing this policy. It has to happen in a coordinated effort across the globe. And another essential aspect of this is making sure that there is redistribution of the wealth at a global level, not just internally, but once again, thinking about the countries in the world, like the United States, who are disproportionately the greatest emitters of carbon or, just pollution, and then the countries who have been suffering the impacts of the climate crisis, and making sure that wealth is distributed outside of the national boundary. And I am at 5 minutes, so I'm not going to talk much more. I got nothing I can get in 21 seconds, so thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Brianne. All right. So next we have our presentation by Dr. Patricia DeMarco, Electricity from Black to Gold, the Facts, the Fantasy, and the Finer Future.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. How are you? It's good to see you today. I'm so glad to see all of you. And there are many who I think I would love to reach, and I'm glad you're filming this. I will put this up on my webpage. And I was very moved to read the collection of essays that Naomi Klein has put together for this exercise. Because realize the Green New Deal is a resolution of intent. It is going to require about 6 or 7 different pieces of legislation to implement those concepts in 4 or 5 committees of different jurisdictions in Congress. There is one already in motion in the Energy and Commerce Committee. I believe it's already at 600 pages. So there is motion, but it's really going to require a tremendous amount of support from the grassroots up. And with the hope that giving you all who are grassroots leaders some material, some facts that will help to carry this message forward, not only about the urgency of our climate condition, but also the wonderful creative possibilities for change. So I'm going to talk about electricity from black to gold and begin with just the fact that we are in a climate emergency. We are facing the existential crisis of our time, not only from climate change, but also from global pollution, which is connected to it. And we have a wonderful living planet that we need to preserve. The Earth provides, fueled by solar power, everything that we need for our existence: fresh air, the biodiversity of species, clean water, fertile ground. And these are the things that come to us for free as services from the living planet that we have as our home. And that planet is under severe stress because of human activities. Not only fossil fuel combustion, but resource extraction of all kinds, and the hyper-consumption mode of our own culture in America, and the increasing population who is adopting our way of life as a model. And we are looking at emissions profiles from transportation, electricity and heat, industries and other fuel combustions, and then smaller ones from agriculture and waste. But the carbon dioxide picture is enormous. And so I want to focus on one of the largest contributors, which is the electricity production sector. Now, I know this looks like a spaghetti chart, but focus on one thing first. We used 101.2 quadrillion British thermal units of energy in 2018. Only 32.7 went to useful work. 68.5 was out the chimney as waste. And the chief reason for this large amount of rejected energy, of wasted energy from all of these fuels, is the electricity generation process, which has only 12.9 out of 38 million BTUs going to uses in residential, commercial, industrial, a little bit in transportation. The rest goes out the chimney. And if you look at transportation, only 5.9 quadrillion BTUs goes to forward motion of the vehicle. All the rest goes out the tailpipe. These two technologies, the internal combustion engine and the Rankine steam cycle, were invented, when do you think? 1860s. People, it's time for an update. We are still using major technologies of the Victorian age for modern times. It's time for a change. So this is not rocket science. We need to bring our critical systems into the 21st century. And it is a fantasy that we're going to do this on a natural gas boom. It has been touted as the bridge fuel of Marcellus Shale. They're touting petrochemical complexes all up and down western Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia for the purpose of making plastics, and this is going to be the boom. We just passed in our legislature House Bill 1100, which will subsidize this industry for another 30 years. The governor has promised to veto it. How many of you have already written your letter to him assuring him he needs to do that? Okay, that's your homework. Everybody, the minute you leave here, you send a letter to Governor Wolf saying, please veto House Bill 1100 because we cannot subsidize fossil fuels for another 30 years. That will subsidize this industry until 2050. That is all the time we have to fix this problem. So it's a bridge fuel promoted as the game changer, as the beginning in restoring manufacturing and security and energy independence. How does this work? And it is an industry that is built on special exemptions. The Energy Policy Act of 2005, rammed through by Vice President Cheney in the back room of a back room without one public hearing, not one, adopted a series of loopholes that removed EPA authority to regulate hydraulic fracturing. It exempted this whole industry from the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Superfund Act, and many occupational safety and health administration provisions to protect workers. This happened in, as part of the Energy Act of 2005. And the promise was for jobs, 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 jobs. This is Mr. Kenneth Broadbent, Steamfitters Local 449, and he was talking about providing 1,500 steamfitters jobs who are going to make, some of whom are going to make $100,000 a year, and that natural gas is going to be bigger than the steel industry 30, 40 years ago. And he says there's 50 years to 100 years of natural gas in this tri-state region. This thing is not going away. If they develop all of this, we will not have a living planet by 2050. There are 39 states where fracking is going on, 15 million people, and 172,000 oil gas industry, mostly non-supervisory and mostly non-unionized. So they're not getting the $100,000 wages, and they're not doing tremendously well. And if we build out all of the gas that we have, this is the Matt Kelso's Hazy Future, Pennsylvania's Energy Landscape in 2045. He's talking about 583 billion gallons of fresh water diverted to the fracking industry, 131 billion gallons of produced wastewater, 386 million tons of sand brought into here, mostly from Wisconsin and pumped underground, could be made into glass for solar collectors instead, 323 million pickup trucks traveling those roads, 45 million tons of solid waste, and 798,000 acres of land that will be impacted by this industry if we build out the whole of the fracking. And this is completely contrary to sound principles of planning for going forward. I can't do a speech without quoting Rachel Carson at least once, and her precautionary principle says that underlying all these problems of introducing contamination to our world is the question of moral responsibility. Responsibility not to our own generation, but to those of the future. We have to start thinking in terms of the complexity of this issue out to the next generation. And we have also to recognize that this whole industry is moving to the production of plastic, something that is already choking the globe with the effluent of that industry and with the discard of that production. So we have, I'm not going to read this all to you because you can all read, right? So we have a tremendous amount of plastic that will come from this plant that will be producing once-used plastic packaging for the most part. There are pollution occurring at every stage of the fracking process, from the production, the spills, evaporation, all the way through to the truck traffic. And you also have tremendous numbers of carcinogens produced that are known to be carcinogens that come from the effluent. And these have been well documented even from the EPA. They can't avoid admitting that they occur. Whoops, help. No. Okay, wait. I hate this. Okay, thank you. Can you send this up? Yeah. Thank you. Okay. And we also know that you have environmental degradation, short-term health effects, long-term health effects, and worker safety health effects that have been well documented. If you want to look at the League of Women Voters Shale and Health Conference reports for the last 5 years, there's a compendium now about this fat of documented research papers identifying the health harms. And we're putting fracking facilities right next to children's playgrounds and residential areas in many parts of our state. This cannot be a good thing. And we are subsidizing this industry tremendously much. 1.65 billion in, this is just for one plant. All of these subsidies were given to just the Shell Appalachia plant. They're planning 4 or 5 more plants. So think about this large number of subsidies that we're giving to an industry that we need to begin stopping. It has also had a negative effect on property values in areas where there are pipelines and also where there are fracking facilities. This is a study in the American Economic Review in 2015. In a place where there were fracking, they saw an average annual loss for groundwater-dependent homes, 13.9% decrease in value, at the same time that homes that had piped water saw an increase in value. So the presence of the fracking in places where people depend on wells, which is a lot of Pennsylvania, they're seeing effects also in denial of mortgages and failure to be able to get insurance for houses because of the fracking operations that are going on. So we need to reframe the problem. The result is that we have, this is Amory Lovins. He says we have a temporary aberration called industrial capitalism, which is inadvertently eliminating its two most important sources of capital, the natural world and properly functioning societies. It is incapable of meeting the challenge of these times to prevent life on Earth from slipping away. And if you have read any of Amory Levin's work from the Rocky Mountain Institute and from his books, you'll see that he's been talking about this since the early 70s and is actually implementing many of the policies that you need to move in a different direction. We also need to recognize that consumers do not see the consequences of this action. The environmental damage to land and ecosystems, all of these things are not reflected in the price. And if you don't live right near them, they're also not evident. They're not real obvious. And the policies that we're practicing right now support environmental destruction. It doesn't count the harm. It only counts the benefit of the extraction itself. We also need to recognize that we are subsidizing an industry that's killing us. $20.5 billion a year in direct production subsidies for oil, gas, and coal extraction, and permanent investment tax credits for oil, gas, and coal of $7.4 billion a year. There's only $1.3 billion a year to the renewable energy industries, and those have to be renewed every 5 years. I have a law student looking up where all of these subsidies and the other ones, the indirect ones, are embedded in the law. Some of them going back to 1837. We're up to 43 so far. So we're building a counter list to the 95 burdensome regulations that Trump is trying to get rid of, and saying we need to get rid of these embedded in law tax subsidies and underwriting for the fossil industries instead. This is a really serious issue because unlike the renewable energy subsidies, which are in an appropriation bill as one line, these are embedded in laws that will have to individually be changed in order to rescind them. And some of them have stood for just decades. And it does matter, because 98% of the operating coal plants are unprofitable if the environmental controls are updated and enforced. And 50% of the yet-to-be-drilled oil and gas wells are not profitable if you assume $50 a barrel oil price, if they didn't have tax preferences. So we are actually holding up industries that would not otherwise be paying off. And even now, the shale industry, which has been hailed as a revolution, has burned through $250 billion more than it brought in over the last decade. It's been a money-losing endeavor. And it is not doing well. The regular Standard & Poor's is going up here, and this includes major electric utility companies, all kinds of high-tech companies, energy efficiency firms, solar firms. The oil and gas production and oil and gas service industries have been falling to 85% below where they were in 2014. So most oil and gas companies will go out of business or get bought out. The successful oil and gas companies will be those whose managers embrace the clean energy revolution and develop alternative energy products. And that is what this is. The Williams Market Analysis Company is an industry and analytics source. What's going on here is the companies who are looking forward and seeing where the future is are investing in the renewable and sustainable technologies. And the ones who are not have not been making money. They're going down. So even on their own metric, they're failing. So if we're looking at a bridge fuel, and we're looking at a bridge from the extractive process to a circular supply chain, how do we do that? Our finer future, a better future with better opportunities, is something that we can build. It's here among us today, and we can expand on it. So the United Nations issued a gap report in 2019 for the Conference of Parties, and it showed that we have a long way to go before we can reach where we need to be. Countries have failed to stop the growth in GHG emissions, and the technologies are here and effective and have improved significantly, but they've not been embraced on a national level. And America is still, on a per capita basis, the largest emitter, although China is quantitatively the largest. And our trend was going down until Trump got elected, and now it's going back up again. And that's true in a number of places. So we need to start looking at how we can reverse this trend. If we want to have sustainability as our goal, we need to recognize that where we are right now, if you have a balance between economy, society, and environmental values, our system right now is driven by dollars. If you can make a buck, you can do it, whether or not it makes sense otherwise. If you can make a buck, it doesn't matter of who gets hurt. If you don't like the way you're getting paid, we've got 5 people in line. It's a situation where we have distorted the values of environmental and societal health and well-being for the sake of the almighty dollar. And if we need to have a rebalancing of the environment and society and the economy, we need to shift the emphasis away from dollars as the only metric that matters. Does that make sense to you? Okay. All right. So we're not talking about a transition. We don't have time for a transition. We started that in 1978, and we were headed in the right direction for a while until the Tax Reform Act of 1986 and the market will fix everything philosophy that came in with Reagan. But we are looking at a metamorphosis. We have to go from being an eating machine devoted to getting fat to something that is sipping gently from plants and flying away, looking at reproduction and creating finer, better things. We are looking at a metamorphosis, taking the resources we have today, reshaping them, realigning them to do something better. Better. Our sustainable future is not a state of deprivation. It is not a state of want. It is a state of a better balance between people and society, where it matters, where your community is what holds things together, not the dollar economy. If we're looking at sustainable development, I still like the Brundtland Commission definition of looking at meeting the needs of today's generation without compromising the needs of future generations. And we need to redefine the problem in order to do this. We receive from the sun over 10,000 times more energy on a daily basis than we need to use for our work that we perform with energy. These are flows of energy that are renewed constantly and refreshed by just the existence of the living earth. It's already distributed. Solar energy is reliable. Nobody questions that the sun is coming up tomorrow, right? Comes up every morning, whether you want to see it or not, right? And we have the technology to use it now. It isn't polluting compared to the coal, oil, and gas, and it is safe. So we need to replace fear. The fear of the unknown, the fear of moving into something different, the fear of not knowing the system, the fear of not being able to provide for your family, the fear of something new. We need to have a different way forward. Are you kidding me? Okay. We need to have a plan for a sustainable economy, not just a transition to from one place to another, but a plan that takes account of the needs of the workers and the needs of workers. And we have the options of moving to the green jobs economy. And a green job is one that has jobs in businesses that produce goods and services that benefit the environment and conserve natural resources. That's in not only renewable energy, but regenerative agriculture and green chemistry to produce goods that we use from non-toxic and non-hazardous feedstocks. And in the green jobs economy, you will have more jobs than we have in the fossil fuel industries already. Solar industry alone has 373,807 jobs. Wind has 101,738. Even nuclear has more, but we only have a few jobs by comparison in the fossil fuel industries. And the cost of energy in the electricity sector is going down and down, so that now solar, thin film utility scale, and wind are both below gas combined cycle in many areas. And this is an industry publication, the Lazard Cost of Energy Comparisons. And this is the unsubsidized analysis, so it doesn't include solar subsidies in this analysis. This is why many utilities are already moving to the new addition of solar and wind and even advanced storage capacity, because they see that the cost curve is coming down. It's been coming down rapidly for wind and for solar over just the last 10 years. So the cost is going down, the ability to use it is increasing, and they are not competing. Gas and coal are not competing with this profile. So replacing the 1800s technologies with new and sustainable energy systems means that we need to focus on the work that we're trying to do and replacing the work with appropriate technologies instead, and not just look at fuel switching. If you're looking at electrifying our economy, we can look at ways to shift electric generation to renewables and add distributed and customer-generated sources and increase the efficiency of the existing built infrastructure. And that's really important, because things like houses, different residential buildings, we may not turn those over in 30 years. You think of the house you live in yourself right now, it's going to be standing in 30 years. So we have to find a way to make those things that are already here more efficient, more effective, and viable in a post-fossil world. So the sectors of the green energy field are renewable energy and the production of power by energy. I'm going to go through these quickly because she's telling me I'm down to 5 minutes. 6.5 minutes. Oh my goodness. Okay. So we have a huge growth surge in this sector of energy storage, and advanced grid has seen a 235% surge in growth in just the last year or two, 2016 to 2017. There's a lot of potential, and much of this technology comes from money that was funding defense applications, which was declassified just 5 years ago. So a lot of the storage and battery technology that was developed for going to the moon was declassified recently. So selections of batteries and storage technology that didn't get chosen for the moonshot has been sequestered as top secret for 50 years. Well, it was just declassified 2 years ago. So that is one of the things that's spurring this tremendous surge in this technology, because these things are now available for commercial application. If you follow the DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, you'll see that there have been a lot of commercialization grants given for storage and advanced battery solutions. So energy efficiency, I'm going to go through these really quickly because you know what they are. And better choices in electric vehicles has tremendous number of high quality, good jobs, lots of investment going into this sector as well, not just by, not by the government at all much, but by private industry and by private sectors. And in Pennsylvania, the coal, oil, and gas jobs are 43,306, and the clean energy jobs are 90,722. Okay, so these are the kinds of jobs in the clean energy sector: grid modernization, energy storage, wind, solar, clean vehicles, renewable energy, energy efficiency. Doesn't even include regenerative agriculture, which is another whole sector of its own. I would need a whole hour if I were going to tell you all that. Okay, and so technology costs are dropping, the demand is increasing, and there are more supportive policies emerging. Mamma mia. Okay. 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 All right. And also, people say that clean jobs don't pay. Well, they pay more than the national average, but again, recognize these industries are mostly not unionized. And so this is what the general market, in the face of all these subsidized fossil industries, is paying. But imagine what will happen if we decide to actually value the jobs in these sectors for the value they contribute to our future well-being. You know, if you guys are union organizers, you got some work to do. Okay? And it does have a lot of different educational fields required, high school or less, all the way up to bachelor degrees or higher. And we have to be aware that the economic transformation cannot be left to the invisible hand of the market. The way things are is not priced to reflect the value of not burning fossil fuels, and there's too much entrenched subsidization of policies to distort the market. You don't see things the way they really are. And this was a pronouncement of the International Trade Union Confederation in Copenhagen. Corporations are the ones who benefit from our existing policies. There's my friend Charlie McAllister. The plan for a transition must include taking care of the workers, the pensions and benefits. If we can bail out General Motors and Goldman Sachs, we can take care of the existing industry workers and not leave them to fend for themselves again. And we have to look at community reinvestment. I spent all day Friday with the Turtle Creek Reimagine group. They came up with 15 projects that they would like to do in the Turtle Creek Valley in order to accomplish a reinvestment in their communities. Imagine what we could do with $1.6 billion in any of your communities. So our status quo is bought and paid for. The oil companies get a big return on their lobbying investment, and this is why we have so little success in trying to change these policies. But we have pathways forward that will work, and the laws of nature are not negotiable. Climate change will happen, and our laws must change in order to accommodate a future that will provide a life of value for our children. And this is the United Nations Executive Director commentary on our behavior at the last UN policy meeting in September. American policy is looking backward to a world that no longer exists. So we have to reverse that and take our way forward in a new direction. I ask you to visualize the children of 2050. It's only 30 years from now. My little niece, Anne, will be 28 years old. My grandchildren and my niece will be about 45. My son and daughter will be getting ready to retire. Where will you be in 2050? And what kind of a world will your children have? Right? I know where I'll be, pushing up daisies. But we need to make a U-turn in our policy direction. We need to move from awareness to outrage because the path that we're on is headed the wrong way. We need to turn it down and articulate policy actions and build support for them in a way that will get us to a 2 degree to 1.5 degree level of our temperature change. We have to increase the social pressure and make a mainstream movement for change. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just ask you that this is not a technology problem. It is an ethics problem. It's a moral problem. And do we have to ask ourselves if we want to preserve the planet for our children and our grandchildren and their great-grandchildren or not? That's all we have. Thank you. Okay. So we take questions? Is that it?
Yes.
How do you go? Okay.
I can run the mic back and forth.
You can use that mic up there.
So is this on still? Yeah. So anyone who has a question, please raise your hand. Emily is taking stack back here, and I will try to get the microphone to people who'd like to speak so that everything's picked up by our technology. So
If you'd like to speak, Raise your card up.
Oh, raise your card.
Toward Emily so
She can see.
your name and put you on stack.
Okay.
This will go on my web page, by the way, so you can have it.
I'm grateful for all the progressive laborers here today. But how's this? I'm becoming more and more convinced that the changes are much faster than even most of us realize. For instance, I've been reading that the amount of heat that is building up in the oceans is equal to hundreds, believe it or not. It's impossible to believe, actually. It's something that's beyond understanding. Hundreds of thousands times the amount of heat released by Hiroshima bombs, by nuclear bombs. So this is every day. Every day, the oceans are getting much hotter. You pointed out that the change is not just linear; it's going in a bell curve.
Exponential.
And this sucker's going straight up now. It's going through the roof, and so the thing is, we don't have till 2030, as Greta Thunberg thinks. She's wonderfully radically and actively progressive, but I don't think she has none of us have the whole picture. None of us know what's going to happen, but it sure looks to me like the changes are going to be much, much, much faster, and they're coming now, this year.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Patty, everybody that knows us know we work very closely together on a lot of this stuff. And Patty knows my position that I think everything that she says is right on the button. The question is, how do we get from here to there in the short amount of period of time that we have? And in my mind, no matter how quaint and trite and cliche-ish it sounds, but we need a world general strike, and we need a revolution, and we need something that attacks the people. At the same time you're putting your positive thing forward, we need to withdraw our consumption from the banks, the financial institutions that are supporting this. And lastly, Patty, I wish you would address the question of the empire, because without dealing with the question of U.S. imperialism and the empire, the stuff that you're talking about doesn't bring the equality and the social and economic justice that we need to see this thing through. And just to give everybody an example of two of the biggest places where the U.S. military has spent the majority of their time and money, unbeknownst to a lot of people, is in the Congo and also in Colombia. And of course, we know about Venezuela. Well, a lot of those places have the only known and biggest sources of minerals, such as lithium and cobalt, that go into solar panels. So talking about solar panels without addressing the empire question, how do you see dealing with that? And how do you see dealing with the financial situation and political component that we're up against to get us from here to there?
First of all, we have to end Citizens United, because we lost our country when we gave over control of our political process to corporations rather than individuals. And as long as you have multinational corporations in control of the policy decisions of major nations, whether they're ours or China or wherever, you are not going to get decisions that depend on the collective well-being of all people. And I think it is really important to recognize how deeply we have gone into that hole of corporate control of our policy direction. For the last 30, 50 years, we have had major policy decisions made for the benefit of a narrower and narrower band of corporate interests. And the public interest has fallen away so much so that we barely talk about the importance of maintaining public institutions like public education, like healthcare, have kind of become things you have to scream and holler for, and they used to be things that we know that are rights of everybody. I know that people like to say that the government is invasive and intrusive, but government put to good purpose can do good things. And I'll give you one example. After World War II, the GI Bill sent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to college for the first time. And if you look at the 2 decades after that, some of the most amazing innovations came out of this country as a result of the people who were given that opportunity to have education. Look at the production out of IBM and Westinghouse and General Electric. A lot of things that came forward came from that kind of leavening of the country by education and shared education to people who had never had it before. I think we're in that kind of a moment where we need to unleash the creativity and the innovation that comes from people in our country at the very roots. And if we do that, and I can tell you this because I've been to 8 Reimagine sessions all around this state, into Wheeling, West Virginia, into Ohio. If you tell people that you have the power to recreate your own future and imagine what it would be like from the bottom up, people have wonderful ideas, amazing ideas for what we can do instead of a fossil-fueled economy. What we need to do is to empower that capacity, fund it, and don't tell me we can't fund it. If you can give $1.6 billion to Shell Corporation, which is a multinational institute, we can certainly fund communities to recover and rebuild.
Yeah, my question was, we talked about gas and oil, possibly bought out or go broke unless they can switch to renewables, etc. What appears to me that I've been seeing is that they would rather go bankrupt so they can just shed all of their responsibilities of cleaning up.
Some of them will.
Yeah, and so my question really is where can we go with that? How do we stop that? I mean, there's some gas company right now recently that's gone around and bought up 1,000 or more gas wells, and we're telling them they only have to clean up 10 a year or some ridiculous number. And I mean, they're not going to be around 100 years from now to clean up all those wells.
No, and that's some of the businesses and jobs in the clean economy are involved in cleaning up the mess. But the people who made the mess should pay for it. And when the bankruptcy court settles out, right now by law, they write off. They write off. That law can change. That requirement can change. And you can send away from subsidizing those companies to requiring them to use their, largesse, their profits, their accumulated wealth to pay for the cleanup that they have caused. And I think to write the laws over so that any new industry has to begin by cleaning up and having a plan for neutralizing its effect on the environment. This is really important to do. We are still paying, in our state, we have over 3,000 miles of contaminated rivers and streams from acid mine drainage from the last round. Who knows how long we're going to be taking or trying to take salt out of the groundwater from the fracking nightmare. So we have to begin by recognizing that it's not only a problem but a huge expense, allocating the proper authority for who has caused that problem and making them clean it up. There is precedent for this in the Superfund cleanup process where you can track back to legacy companies and they're liable for the cleanup of toxic spills. So we have a precedent in law for that.
Thanks so much, Patty. First of all, in the spirit of the red line acknowledgement from earlier, I think it's really important that while I agree the GI Bill was great policy and proved the power of government to do good in folks' lives, we have to also remember the enormous racial disparities in its implementation and execution. But But my question is this, I'm no capitalist, but let me play devil's advocate for a second. You said the invisible hand of the market couldn't solve this problem, but you also suggested that industry estimates themselves suggest that in a no subsidy world, the per kilowatt hour cost of renewable energy is about half that of fossil energy. If we were to remove all the subsidies and just let it all play out, wouldn't the market substantially address the problem? I mean, who doesn't want to chase that kind of profit?
Right. The market as it exists right now is heavily skewed. But if you were to take all the subsidies off of oil, gas, and coal and nuclear, those bars for those industries would ship very far to the right. And the utility industry is really pretty much a dollars and cents crowd, and a lot of them are public regulated, more than half of them. So when they see objective numbers in new solar, new wind is cheaper than new gas, they have been moving in that direction. And also, when you define, and this is a new regulatory arena, but when you define utility rate base, what they can invest in as storage, artificial intelligence for leveling load between people who are making as well as using power, and adding the whole concept of renting the tops of your customers' buildings for solar as utility plant, then it opens this arena even wider. And as I said, this is not a fuel switching situation, because if one of the most effective things we could do in terms of a policy that would make a market would be to declare that the National Building Code for all new buildings in the United States of America would begin with a passive solar design with photovoltaic roofs. If you do that, you think about all the new buildings that are going up in the old way, and they're going to become a liability for the next 50 to 100 years. Whereas if you say they all have to look like the Forest Hills Borough building, which is a passive solar design with geothermal heating and a photovoltaic roof, we got a negative $2,581 electric bill for our first year of operation, net over a year. So we're making more electricity than we're using to power and serve all the functions of that building for a year. If every new building did that, if all the affordable housing complexes that go up were built on that model, the operating costs are less than half of the cost of a regular building. We could make advances on this system very quickly. But the market unfettered, the way it is now, with the distorted weights on it from the subsidies and the policy influence of special interests, you're not going to get there with that market operating on its own. We have to intervene and send it back the other way. I mean, regulation is a good thing if it's done in the public interest.
All right, and this will be just due to time, this will be our last question.
Yeah, this is great. So I've been reading a little bit about think tanks and their effect on media and the narrative. And one of the things that I've been learning about techniques of fascism is that there's a real power play for the narrative. Mm-hmm. And your message isn't getting across. It is completely being overwhelmed by think tanks related to the Koch brothers and other think tanks that are dominating the narrative. So how do we begin to change the media concept and really begin to get a narrative that's powerful enough to promote this concept of the Green New Deal? Because we're losing as environmentalists. There's such a prejudice from the industry, and what they're promoting in terms of media is horrendously false, and we haven't overcome that prejudice yet. How do you plan to do it?
Anybody who has not written a letter to the editor, a blog, a letter to your legislator, talk to the interests in your own community, the businesses in your own community, finding ways to make it more visible that we're doing good things now. We need to do that. We have to get those stories out there, because these are the green job, the blue circles are the green job concentrations all around the country. This is not an isolated industry, but it isn't big enough yet to completely swamp. And as I said, did you know that there were 3 times more energy efficiency and renewable jobs in Pennsylvania than fossil jobs? How many of you knew that? How many of you have ever seen that statistic on the radio? No. How many of you have ever seen it on TV? No. We need to make those things clear to people. And I know that we don't have the might of the Koch brothers, but we have the Heinz Endowments. We have the Pittsburgh Foundation. We have Public Source, which has covered a good bit of this. I think we just have to, get loud.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. DeMarco.
You're welcome.
All right.
I don't know what
Yes.
Can I just take this out?
I think so.
Why don't you wait it all?
Okay. So now we're going to take about a 5-minute break, give everyone a chance to stretch, get something to eat, go to the bathroom, and then we'll reconvene for the second presentation of the evening.
You missed out Guillermo being added. Okay. So this is his bio, and I would be glad to deliver a short lecture. So if you introduce Al and Ben for the first part of the evening, they'll have about 10 minutes, and then Guillermo will have about 10 minutes.
Okay.
And I'll introduce him.
Okay, sure.
Okay. You want to just read your?
Yeah. So I'd like to not the whole thing.
That? Leave it there, I think. I don't think anyone else is grabbing your
Get away, Ben.
Hey, sisters and brothers, how you doing? So I wanted to put us in some historical context in terms of how the original New Deal was achieved for working people, and we should preface that by acknowledging that the implementation of New Deal programs, certainly were discriminatory in their nature. But there were major achievements that were won by working people in winning concessions from the rich, and trying to do here with trying to win a Green New Deal. And the New Deal was won by millions of workers organizing during the Depression into unions at their workplace. And these workers were led in large part by communists, socialists, and radical trade unionists. And they struck and they engaged in massive direct action. So this is probably best exemplified in 1934 with general strikes in Toledo, Ohio, in Minneapolis, and in San Francisco. And it was this pressure that was able to be applied on capital to win those concessions. And I think in the labor movement, those that are truly concerned and serious about winning a Green New Deal understand that the tool through which we will be able to best use and the most influential tool in order to take on large industries that are themselves very powerful and very organized is the mobilization of workers at their workplace. When workers put pressure directly on production and profit, we know.
I started reading about it, and we started trying to build a movement, which didn't succeed, in Erie to municipalize the electric and the gas utilities. And some of what I learned in that period of time is that when you own the utility, you can decide what energy sources you're going to use. And even in the 70s, I was reading stuff in the 70s, these publicly owned electric utilities were doing all sorts of innovative stuff to go to renewables. It was an experience that also gave me some idea that, you know, labor ought to take the lead in trying to change this stuff. Sometime before we finish this whole series, I think we should have a session to just discuss what would green jobs look like? What would a green transition look like? Because there's so much that needs to be done. I'm glad that Naomi Klein mentions relocalizing production. You know, I lived through one of the worst transitions in American economic history. I joined the labor movement, and in my lifetime, I saw the manufacturing industrial labor movement decimated. We went through something called deindustrialization. Our jobs left the country, our jobs are destroyed. I was a union organizer through much of the time, seeing plant after plant, negotiating a plant closing agreement, trying to get people some kind of scrap of severance pay. We went through a lot of unjust transitions. So we kind of know in reverse what a just transition might look like. And the idea, a very good idea, is partly caused by the fact that how many of us in this room are wearing even one item of clothing that was made in North America? Okay, 2 people, yeah. It used to be our clothes were made in the United States or Mexico or Canada, and now they're shipped all over the world, right? My union used to make all kinds of electronic stuff. That's why the word radio is in our name. We don't make radios anymore, but we used to. All that stuff comes from Asia. I'm not saying Asia shouldn't have manufacturing, but why should everything we consume be made on the other side of the world and shipped? What is the impact of that on the carbon footprint? Is my time up? Okay, you're doing all kinds of gyrations over there, so all right, I'll stop. I could go on for hours. Thank you.
So I just want to say, this series does not have to stop on May 31st, right? We can keep going. This is the work of our generation, right? So whether or not it's in this form or not, it's not the end. So I'd like to introduce Guillermo Perez. He's gonna, Guillermo Perez, is that correct?
Guillermo Perez.
Perez. Sorry. So Guillermo is on the National Executive Board of the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement. He's the president of the Pittsburgh chapter.
I am.
And what's that?
I am. Sí,
yes.
Soy el presidente.
He's also on the executive board of Casa San Jose, a nonprofit that welcomes and provides resources for Latino families in Pittsburgh. He's also part of the United Steelworkers Education and Membership Development Department as a labor educator.
Yeah, but we're not here to talk about
yes.
that.
Okay. He is here with his LACLA hat on.
I am.
All right. Thank you, Guillermo.
All right. Thank you for having me. So Helen asked me to talk a little bit about trying to sort of connect some dots here with respect to the sort of the subject at hand and the crisis for immigrant families here in the U.S. and specifically in southwestern Pennsylvania. If you want to sort of find like the 2 most struggling activists, I would say it's the immigrant rights people and the environmentalists in this part of the state. So we should definitely get together because we're fighting the same people. But I do want to say a couple of things. Our LACLA chapter has been around since 2014, and the thing that I'm proudest of in terms of what we've been able to accomplish is something I think I mentioned the last time I was here, and that was using the money that we've raised from unions, for the most part, each year for a celebration that we do for Hispanic Heritage Month. It's called Que Viva Clemente, because Clemente is like the most famous Latino associated with Pittsburgh. As you know, there historically not been a lot of Latinos in Pittsburgh, but it's changing. We're here. Aquí estamos y no nos vamos. And so it was through going to a labor notes conference. There's one coming up. If people haven't gone, you should really go. It's an amazing conference. I met some activists from Western Massachusetts who had created a solidarity fund to help families in crisis. And so we got into discussions with the Pennsylvania Immigration and Citizenship Coalition, PIC, which is a really great statewide organization. And we created this bond fund, El Fondo Solidario de Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Solidarity Fund. And with it, we've been able to get people detained by ICE out of detention and back with their families, at least temporarily. But even so, it's a huge victory to get people out of ICE detention. So I guess the important thing that I would want to emphasize, and I spoke about this before, and it is coming up, on March 5th, we will officially launch our campaign targeting Colcom. And this is the time when we're really going to need environmentalists to be out on the street with immigrant rights activists to call out white supremacy, call out eco-fascism, talk about specifically, maybe even about the fact that climate change is causing people to migrate. Are we going to punish them for that? Are we going to allow a foundation to greenwash its reputation by giving money to prominent civic organizations, many environmental organizations? So we're gonna stir some shit up, most definitely. Well, that's what we do. But it's again, I mean, the timing I think is really terrific for this, and I think it's a great opportunity for our two movements to really come together and here locally. The worst, I mean, every week is bad, but the latest thing now is we're going to see ICE officers looking more and more like SS. I mean, they're going to create these paramilitary. They're going to be like SWAT teams, right? They're going to start actually killing people. We've already seen it in other places. People getting shot by ICE agents. ICE are not police officers. They're not law enforcement. They have no business policing our streets. They have no business having weapons and pointing them at anybody. It is not a crime to leave your home to seek out a better life. That's not a crime. That's our story. That's the story of humanity. So anyway, I don't want to get into a lot of details about what exactly is going on. All I can tell you is people are living in a state of terror. People are afraid to go to court, victims of domestic violence are scared to report it. Parents are scared to go to their parent-teacher meetings. You know, fathers and mothers who get up in the morning to go to work don't know for sure that they'll come back. Do you know what I mean? For a child, what that is to have to think about, that your parents could just disappear one day. And when I say disappear, it's not an exaggeration. They literally disappear. If not for CASA has a rapid response network just to find people, just to find them, because they're not allowed to communicate with anybody once ICE takes them. So this is a great moment for us because we have an opportunity here. Colcom, I think I said this before, but it bears saying again. Colcom is not a foundation, an environmental organization that dabbles in white supremacy. COLCOM is a white supremacist organization that uses environmentalism to greenwash their racism, their white supremacy. And we got to call them out. And my real hope is that right here in Pittsburgh, we will take down one of the biggest funders of anti-immigrant white supremacy in the United States. And we could do that here. So, March 5th at 10 o'clock, we launch our campaign. And we're going to give lots of opportunities for people to be involved in that. And I suspect it's going to be, as I said, it's going to be something. Because it's going to make a lot of very nice, well-meaning liberal people very uncomfortable. We hope so too, because we do think at the end of the day that the folks who took this money know it was the wrong thing to do. So now they have to stand up and publicly say, not only that they're not going to take any more money, but that it was a mistake to take it in the first place. All right. Muchísimas gracias.
So Guillermo did not use his full time. I want to just take
It's
a little.
unusual for a Latino.
I just want to say that we will be talking. Guillermo's going to stay. We're going to talk about this in the action planning group. If you want to be part of this, if you want to be part of fighting PA House Bill, 1100, as Patty asked us. If you want to stand with the people who are occupying the Cathedral of Learning right now to get them to divest, if you want to help us move into real action, please do stay. Please be part of that.
All right, yes, thank you, Guillermo, and thank you, Helen. Okay, that leaves us with discussion time. As always, yes, please raise your name tag. So, okay.
I had a question. This March 5th at 10 a.m. Where are you meeting? What is this? Who show up?
Actually, unfortunately, you guys at the UE, you share offices. Colcom's in your building, by the way. Oh, good. We're going to be in front of, it's Gateway Center. Gateway Center at 10 o'clock. We're going to have an event page that we officially will push out, so all of you are going to see it. But it'll be 10 o'clock, Gateway Center, Thursday, March 5th.
This morning's Post-Gazette has a big article about something that was sponsored by Colcom. So talk about, I don't know if you call this greenwashing or not, it's a citizenship event. It's an event at which American immigrants are becoming citizens. And the final paragraph talks about this is sponsored by Colcom. So people have to write letters to the editor to explain why Colcom is doing this hypocritically, to talk about what Colcom is really doing that's white supremacist.
Yeah, open, so Helen's next.
So Guillermo, something that a lot of people don't understand is just how much immigrants contribute in terms of labor to our economy, everything. And if we're going to be going forward with the Green New Deal, one of the proposals is a massive reconstruction effort. And of course, undocumented people who don't have documents have been building our homes, our buildings. They've been laboring in so many different areas, paying taxes and receiving nothing in return but, at this point, terror and quite often vilification and xenophobia. So would you speak a little bit more to that? Especially what you've seen on the local level. I've heard just a few horror stories that you've told that are really powerful illustrations.
Well, it's there are sectors of the economy that are very, very dependent on immigrant labor, including undocumented immigrant labor. The biggest one by far and away is the agricultural sector. There's basically, conservatively, half of all the farm workers in the United States are undocumented, and that's conservative. It's probably more than that. So if all of those people were removed, the whole sector would collapse. As Helen was saying, construction. There's a very sort of bad joke, but it's accurate that if Trump built the wall he originally intended, it's almost for sure that undocumented people would be building it because they are a third of the construction workforce in Texas. States like California or New York, go to New York. What would become of the restaurant industry in New York if all of a sudden all the undocumented disappeared? I mean, it would collapse. The thing that's important to understand with respect to immigrant labor, and especially undocumented immigrant labor, is they are a supplement to the native-born workforce that we have. They don't take jobs; they create jobs. Jobs that otherwise, all the people working in the front of the restaurant don't get those jobs if there aren't people working in the back of the restaurant. And so, the fact that those folks are there in the back of the restaurant is what creates and makes those restaurants viable. And the same thing's true of almost every industry or sector of the economy where they are. So basically what we have is a de facto guest worker program, only the guest worker's guest is not what I would describe that relationship. It's absolutely understood. Their labor is needed. They make huge contributions to the economy. For the people in this room, some of whom are now getting Social Security, they're subsidizing our Social Security in the tune of tens of billions of dollars, money that they're almost certainly never gonna see. So, you know, and this raises sort of an interesting question to maybe tackle about this question of growth or not growth. But demographically, we need young working age people in the country so that all the old people will have a decent retirement. And so this is part of what the immigrant population does. They're younger, they participate in the workforce at higher levels, and they have kids and they have families, and you know, they're gonna be a key part of our future as a country, assuming we have a future as a country.
Stacks open.
I think my brother raised a very important issue, and that's how do we intersect and cross-pollinate with other struggles. And if the Green New Deal and the people that are envisioning and the people that are writing and the people that are constructing on paper and on blueprint the Green New Deal don't understand the need to cross-pollinate with Black Lives Matter, with the immigration movement, with the Me Too movement, with the indigenous movement, and with the many other movements out there, if we don't learn how to cross-pollinate and how to sit down, we will never, ever get the voice, get the political power, and get the whatever we need to overthrow these bastards. And we have a very short time to do it. And I think that this group needs to address the question of how do we do that in Pittsburgh? How do we sit down? I mean, I went to 3 or 4 other major gatherings in the last month, Unite, that Summer Lee started. I don't see hardly any of those people in this room, or vice versa. I belong to an Earth Day coalition that's building a humongous, it has over 40 organizations. Most of the people in this room aren't going to those meetings or aren't part of that process. We have got to figure out how to weave these movements and these organizations together and sit down and work out what we got to work out, because if we don't, they're going to pick us off one by one, piece by piece, constituency by constituency. And I would like to raise one more time what I raised to Patty. You have frontline communities here in Pittsburgh, especially minority communities that are getting hammered. You had frontline communities out in the rural areas that are dealing with the effects of fracking and the petrochemical industry, but you have frontline communities overseas that no matter how well we do things here, they are getting murdered. You have 6 million Congolese people in the last 20 years who have gotten killed so we could get their resources and minerals for our solar panels. You have 8 million people who have been made refugees in Colombia by forces paid with US dollars so we could get the precious minerals and resources we need. If we don't deal with that question at the same time, you will never have a Green New Deal that is equitable. You'll never have one that is just, and you'll never have one that succeeds if we don't deal with all of those questions. So my challenge to this group is, how do we here in Pittsburgh figure out the ways and the means with all the constrictions and all the, I mean, I know everybody in here is probably part of 3 or 4 other organizations doing a million different things. We've got to figure out the way to cross-pollinate, to communicate, and sit down and build a political movement in the streets, in our educational centers, in our judicial areas, in our legal and political arenas. And if we don't take all of those on like we're playing a piano, we're never going to come out with any harmony. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to say a little bit more about New Deals and New Deals and just transitions, which, because I had a very short time up there before. Just transition doesn't just mean we're going to make sure people, white guys that worked in the oil industry or the coal mines and their communities or other industries that are gone under get good jobs, get their needs taken care of. It's got to include people that have been left out of the old economy all along, which mostly means people of color and their communities. These green jobs have to include everybody. Just on a couple of things, because there's been discussion about the New Deal here. The New Deal was an amazing thing, and the best things it did were the result of pressure from below. The reason we got labor rights as a central part of the New Deal in 1935 was that in 1934, there were some of the biggest strikes we've ever seen in American history. The reason we got unemployment compensation as part of the New Deal was because even before Roosevelt was elected, in 1930 and 31 and 32, there was a mass movement of the unemployed in this country. The reason we got Social Security, a lot of people don't know this, there was a mass movement of old people in the 1930s. It was called the Townsend Plan. It was started by a guy named Dr. Francis Townsend, demanding a national pension that would have been much more generous than Social Security. And the idea was, you get this when you turn 60, but you got to stop working, because this is a jobs program too, to open up jobs for younger people. So that agitation by millions of old people, millions of senior citizens, resulted in the fact that we did get Social Security out of this. The other big transformation that happened at the end of Roosevelt's term, or close to the end, was we converted the whole damn economy of this country to war production, and then we converted it back again, like that, like in months, which was quite amazing, and it shows how fast we can move when we have to. But a couple things about that, a couple of gender and racial equality issues about that. All of a sudden, when all the young men went off to war, this country discovered that women who had been taught, we've been told, people had been socialized for generations that women can't do hard, heavy work. It's beyond their capacity. Suddenly, that all went out the window, and women were building tanks and building bombers and building the weaponry that defeated the Axis powers. Amazingly, right? And then as soon as the war was over, suddenly that was all erased, and they go back to your kitchen, go back to raising babies. You can't do this anymore. So suddenly, very fast, this country got amnesia about women could do. The other thing is, the one moment when the Roosevelt administration really did something for African Americans was when A. Philip Randolph and black leaders, particularly black working class leaders, decided we are not going to put up with this war boom leaving us out. And they announced they were going to march on Washington for racial justice in the war production. Roosevelt got scared, and he agreed, despite the objections of all the Southern Democrats, because the Democratic Party, remember, back then the Democratic Party was the most racist party of the two. But Roosevelt enacted the Fair Employment Practices Commission that said, if you don't if you discriminate against black people in your factory, you're not getting any war work. So we can learn a lot from past transitions, and I'm going to stop here, but those are a couple lessons I thought we should remember.
Thank you. Okay, so nobody else is on staff. I want to respond to Mike's call right here now. We do need to connect to other organizations. We need to become more diverse in this room. We need to be participating in and supporting other groups. Part of the intention in inviting Guillermo here is so that we could help support that movement. To having one PA here is to support the environmental justice work that they're doing. And this, in some cases, involves very concrete campaigns. It also involves reaching out and calling in the unions that right now are resisting. So we had already planned in the outreach team to do this, but as we do this, think about groups that you know that you personally can invite to either come to this discussion and be part of it, to be part of our action planning, or to directly support one of the campaigns that we've talked about. So we're gonna go around and I'm gonna ask each of you to name an organization or a group and commit to contacting that group. Let's really start to spread and grow and support each other across this region.
Congress of Neighboring Communities, which are all the municipalities around the edges of Pittsburgh and the city of Pittsburgh. We've been working together to work on recycling, on the opioid crisis, on infrastructure upgrade, but it's municipal officials, and it meets in the daytime, but they need to hear a lot of this stuff and need a lot better connections with our Congress of Neighboring Communities. It's called Connect. But it's elected officials, municipal officials.
Yes, I think having kind of a 1-minute elevator pitch, right, is great. But each of you also knows the particular person or group that you're addressing. So you will need to tailor it to the particular purposes, missions, or needs of that organization in order to call them in. Okay, Terry. Oh no, I passed them. Oh, no, nobody gets a pass. Just name a group that you think that you could connect to.
Well, I'm with Braddock Residents for Our Future. But they're very aware of,
sure.
you know, who they are, so, anyway. That was the best I could do.
Thank you.
Business that might be like a place for flyers or something like that.
Okay. People of Petro.
Some of us are here.
Okay, I was just going to say Pittsburgh United, the housing.
Pittsburghers for Public Transit.
They're going to be presenting here, so they're already part of it. You got to think of somebody else.
Come back to me. Oh, Bend the Arc, Pittsburgh.
Joe?
I guess the Pittsburgh Friends meeting.
Working Group Against Racism. It's part of the Friends meeting. Just WGAR is good. WGAR. Mm-hmm.
The Black Urban Gardeners and the Black Environmental Activists.
They are also part here connected with them.
The National Council on Jewish Women, Pittsburgh chapter.
I don't know if other folks.
Who here has a piece of paper? Okay. Who has a notebook? All right. Are you willing to sacrifice some paper? Of course. All right. Everybody, please pass it down. Instead of me writing all these things, which is going to take a long time, right? Yeah. Let's pass out a piece of paper and just write one down and pass it in to close out our 7 o'clock session. And then get a little more food, water, anybody who wants to take part in the action planning, in logistics planning, which is about childcare, transportation. So the video, I'm actually going to let you make that call. Oh. So this is being recorded, and this video is going to be going up on our website, and it's on Facebook. We're going to ask that you also share that video out.
Thank you, Dean. I just want to clarify about sending action items out. Are we okay about the emails that we've submitted sending out action items, or how best to do that?
So one of the questions that has just been raised is, how do we inform this larger group? There's now over 160 people within this group. Over 160 people have attended at one point or another, or have committed to being part of it as speakers, organizations, and so on. So everyone here, you are very welcome right now to make any major announcements. One of the things that our action group can do is decide how we are going to inform those people of actions that are coming up. And there are different ways we could do that, right? We could decide on priorities. We could invite people to send things that they want announced. But I think that the action working group should address that question. We're growing really fast. This was going to begin as a book discussion group, and it's turned into something else that's growing really rapidly. So if you're interested in being part of that, please do stay. We will be meeting upstairs in the Pirates room, and Patty will be leading a visioning session down here, starting in about 5 minutes. Did I address the question the way that you were?
Yeah, mine's more immediate.